And they want to take us to a digital currency, and I know that this is literally what they want. I don't think they see anything else as a possible solution. Literally, we're talking about over the half of the world's population within these BRIC nations, between the ones who are official members and those who have applied to be members. And that's there's a great comment that was made in one of my videos recently is, when is the United States going to actually apply to join the BRICS?
No one has as much impact on the price of gold and silver as the Fed. We've got a big rate decision coming up next week, and we have a special guest today, Mr. Pat Holland from the Missouri Freedom Initiative. Pat knows a thing or two about gold and silver, a thing or two about the history of the gold and silver price and the history of the Fed. And most importantly, he's actively involved in forwarding legal tender legislation, SB 100, here in the state of Missouri, that would allow Missouri citizens to reclaim their constitutional right to use gold and silver as legal tender. But today we're going to talk about the Fed. Pat, welcome to Ron's Basement.
Hey, Ron, thank you for having me back. I have a question for you, though.
Yes, sir.
The shirt. You've got the shirt on. Wasn't there some sort of evil, diabolical plan to incinerate it or something?
It's been tried. It's been tried many times, but the red shirt is a fan favorite. It's I think it just had its 35th birthday, and there's iron-on patches on top of iron-on patches.
Nice.
Here on the elbows. But
nice.
It's like, it was that Linus from the Peanuts cartoon that had that blanket he carried around all the time.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I'm just saying, but last time Smitty texted me, he said something about your wife has a tiny doll voodoo version of your shirt. She's sticking pins in it upstairs. So I'm just throwing it out, man. I don't know. Smitty might be lying. I don't know.
Right. Well, Smitty, I think, is conspiring with Susie, and now I'm starting to think maybe you as well, because I've been digging this shirt out of the trash dumpster a few times over the years. So our good friend, Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve, last week, it seemed like his cast of clowns, let's call it a comedy troupe, went out and spread the message, spread the word that they've got to fight inflation, raise rates, and that's caused some friction in the gold and silver price. Any thoughts on what the Fed might be doing now, what their kind of strategy may be? Should we believe the Fed?
Okay. First of all, believe the Fed? No, absolutely not. And I'm going to probably go off on a little side story here, so you can understand better my psychology of why we can't trust the Fed. First of all, I think most reasonable people can agree that history is absolutely replete with turning points. Lots of things happen throughout history that cause, it's a causal event that causes many, many interesting things to happen. Now, in the case of what's going on with the economy right now, I look back to what happened in 2008. I saw it coming in the spring of 2007. I got the date wrong, that I predicted that the housing market would crash and take down the economy by 1 full year. I actually moved. My wife and I literally moved from one house to another. We went from the city to the country because what I saw coming. And it was no crystal ball, no tea leaves. It was actually looking at the bond market is what I was looking at. Okay. So we take a look at what happened in 2008 and how they were able to stem it. Because in 2007, I would have said it's over. What I didn't see coming was a couple of things. Number one, bailing out of the banks. Okay, this is really critical, gang, because to us, that's just normal now. You bail out banks, right? In 2007, it didn't happen. There was one, there was the S&L bailout that happened in the late 80s. That was the one time, and it was extenuating circumstances. And of course, one of the Bush sons was running S&L, and of course, his papa was vice president. So, or president, I'm sorry, he was president at the time. So that had something to do with it. But by far and large, all these commercial bank failures were not seen as politically viable to bail out. Point number two, and another very important point, negative interest rates. We actually saw that happen to roughly about 1/3 of the world's bonds after the 2008 crisis. It has not happened before in recent history. However, my understanding is it did happen once before, but I forget the time and the place. But sometime in the last 200 years, they did go to negative interest rates. So if you couple those two together and you say that's how they, quote unquote, bailed out the system and the Fed brought us back. They brought us back from the dead. You know, they devised a plan. They actually worked something out. Actually, I'm trying to think of what they can do now. Because, I mean, we hear this all the time that Jerome Powell has painted himself into a corner. Nothing could be further from the truth when you think of the creative minds in banking. They will come up with another way. Well, guess what? They have. It's the digital dollar. Everything is pointing towards going towards the digital dollar. And for those who say, well, Pat, you admitted that you were wrong in 2007 because it was the fall of 2007. I was so sure of it. And it was the fall of 2008 is when it actually happened. I was off by a year. But what I will say is that it's entirely possible that I'm wrong again. But the BRIC nations are what make me pause, because actually we've got to do something very, very quickly about the BRIC nations, because nations one by one are falling like dominoes, leaving the dollar. Mm-hmm. It's happening, folks, in real time right now as we're making this video. And so there's small nations. We're not hearing about big nations leaving the dollar, but we're hearing about the small ones leaving. They're the ones who can do it the easiest. So that actually makes sense to me. So if you talk about China leaving the dollar, that's probably going to be the most difficult nation to leave the dollar. But it will be easier if there's a bunch of smaller satellite nations using their currency, the yuan or the renminbi, you know, whatever you choose to call it. So in my mind, what's happening is basically the stage is being set for China to ultimately leave, which is what's going to be most devastating to the world reserve currency we know is the dollar. Okay, I took you on that little trip. Sorry, so you guys can better understand where I'm. Go ahead.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying, because it's something that I believe is the situation right now as well. We've got two things going on. Number one, sure, we had the 2008 crisis. They papered over it, printed money, however you want to say it. Now we are in a situation where we have much more debt, not just the United States, but the entire world, right?
Correct.
Or the Western world, like multiples more debt overall. So we're in a situation where the system is much more sensitive, much more fragile, right? Because of all that debt. You know, you hear the old bubblegum and duct tape analogy, or however you want to say it, but the system in general, because of this aggregate amount of debt that's grown and grown, is much more sensitive. I mean, if I come to you and say, hey, Pat, I've got $100,000 in debt, I'm having some financial trouble, and you help me work out a plan to kind of manage that, right? Like maybe I'm not going to reduce the debt, but I'm going to avoid bankruptcy. And then I come back to you 8 years later and say, well, Pat, now I have $350,000 in debt. My situation has become much more sensitive, and that's a good analogy for what's gone on in the world. So we have that situation. On top of it, like you mentioned, and I think this is so important, and it is different this time. It is different than what we had in 2008. We have the world geopolitical situation. In 2008, the U.S. was still the hegemony power of the world. But hey, we're 15 years later now? Things are different, man. I mean, things are different.
The BRIC nations, by the way, the first utterance of the BRIC nations and the plan was 2010, and it was laughed off by the media. Trust me, I mean, I saw it. The mainstream media didn't even carry it. It was alternative media that was talking about it, and of course, it was a fly-by-night story. A lot of people thought, but that's a big deal. I mean, literally, we're talking about over the half of the world's population within these BRIC nations, between the ones who are official members and those who have applied to be members, you know. And that's there's a great comment that was made in one of my videos recently, is when is the United States going to actually apply to join the BRICS? Um, and actually, you'd have to laugh at a comment like that because actually, it's funny, but actually, you have to step back and
Yeah,
think that may not
right.
be a bad idea. You know?
Yeah, no, I know. That's what makes it so funny, right? Is unfortunately for the United States citizenry and my children and your children, that it could at some point be a viable option.
First Mining Gold is a development company advancing two of the largest gold projects in Canada, Springpole in Ontario and Duparquet located in Quebec. Each already has 5 million ounces of gold reserves, but exploration initiatives are underway at both projects to find even more gold. First Mining is well financed, has zero debt, and owns an interest in 4 additional Canadian gold development projects.
And they want to take us to a digital currency, and I know that this is literally what they want. I don't think they see anything else as a possible solution. There will be no more versions or iterations of the dollars being printed because they really truly want it electronic. So if we go back to our original thesis here, our original question here is basically, what is the Fed doing? What can they do? And it's going to that digital dollar. And
That's
then
their
any way you
escape
slice
hatch.
it, that's, yeah. I mean, that's, it's not even a patch. I mean, that's
Right.
their solution, because hidden within that digital dollar is basically, gosh darn it, everything from total complete control of a population to depopulation and everything in between. And we know this, China's doing it. You know, China's actually effectively doing this now. And so we have to take that seriously, but that's their solution, gang. Our solution as people should be gold and silver. Go back to the Constitution. There's nothing the federal government can do to stop states from doing that, you know, apart from, you know, bringing out the military, you know, if they really are really offended by gold and silver legislation, you know. But I say that jokingly, that won't happen. But so that's where I see the Federal Reserve right now. Their plan is not another wily, you know, solution with negative interest rates. Or by the way, they're bailing out banks right now. They've never stopped doing that. QE Infinity is going on right now. It's through the repo market and the reverse repo market. You know, they've got, you know, those books so cooked, there'd be no way to unravel the nightmare that is literally what's going on with the banks. And by the way, I don't think they're just trading treasuries or bonds back and forth. I think they're trading derivatives, folks. I have reasons to believe that, but I can't prove it. In other words, they're selling derivatives to the Federal Reserve for cash to get them off their books. That's what I think is part of what's good. It's not necessarily the whole thing, but I don't see any more magic tricks coming out right now. I think that it's going to be the digital dollar.
Yeah, and I have a degree in accounting. I worked for one of the big 4 accounting firms, so I'd like to think that I can understand financial statements and numbers. What you said, you hit the nail on the head. It makes your head spin, the fact that the Fed and they have complicated and cooked those books to a degree that it's almost incomprehensible. It really is. I mean, the repo market, the reverse repo market, like you said, what happened 4 weeks ago when we had this little bank crisis that nobody talks about anymore, right? Oh, what they printed $200 billion basically to deal with that. I mean, you know, and the fact, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. The fact that the Fed claims they're trying to fight inflation. The Fed can't fight inflation. If the Fed needs inflation. The Fed fears deflation, right? They're gonna throw up this message that, oh, we're gonna fight. We need to fight inflation, and we're, you know, the reality is no, they can't fight. If they fought inflation, it'd be the end.
I agree with you. In fact, governments and banks will not survive deflation. They simply won't survive. They literally go out of business. Even governments will, because deflation means fewer taxes coming in. The government has to shrink, and governments don't like to shrink. You know, deflation means, you know, basically banks won't be making money anymore. They simply close up shop and they go away. They're fractionally reserved like crazy anyway. And there's one more aspect that we could bring in right now, which is more than speculation. This is why I bring it up. And that's the second balance sheet that the Fed has. Catherine Austin Fitts actually talks about this. And I'm going to say it was 2017. Janet Yellen was actually, doing a PR thing, a press relation. It was after a Fed meeting, and she was talking to the press, and she was asked about the second balance sheet for the Fed. Believe it or not, this actually happened. I saw it live. I've never been able to find it anywhere else ever since, but I saw it live. And she said to the reporter that she would be willing to talk to him after the press conference was over. That's all she said. She didn't answer the question. Now, if there weren't a second balance sheet for the Fed, because that's huge right there, just to even hear that. I mean, especially when you know how the Fed's supposed to work. If you were Janet Yellen, you should have diffused that immediately. She didn't. She wasn't expecting the question. And I'm pretty sure Catherine Austin Fitts planted the question. I'm pretty sure she did. But the fact of the remains, if there's a second balance sheet, what the heck is on it?
Yeah.
Isn't that the question? She didn't deny the existence of a second balance sheet with that question. And that's something we all need to remember. And maybe Jerome Powell needs to be asked the same question. What is on that second balance sheet? Catherine Austin Fitts, go ahead.
I know what she said to that reporter after the press conference. I have insight. Yeah, she said, "Don't you ever ask me that question again. Do you understand, young man?" Like an angry grandmother,
No, knowing how the Fed works, he was probably put in a parade in a convertible with the top down. That's how the Fed works. That's how they operate.
Yeah.
So at any rate, I really think if we, once again, we could dissect things and we could actually tear things apart to a point where they don't even make sense anymore. But if there is a second balance sheet, I wonder what's on it. And I'll bet you my bottom Federal Reserve note, I'll bet you it has something to do with derivatives.
Derivatives, yeah.
Yep.
It is
a lot of them.
And it is so complicated, right? I mean, it's hard enough for your average person to understand the repo market, the reverse repo market, all these different, it is smoke and mirrors, I think, is the best way you can describe.
It's creative finance. That's what it is.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, Pat, what's the answer for the average person if they don't want to attempt to get a PhD in Federal Reserve accounting? The answer is silver and gold, right? I mean, they can mess with it, quote unquote, the price of it based in fiat US dollars temporarily, but long term, they really can't mess with it.
They can't. You're correct. And where it comes to an end is when the dollar comes to an end. When the dollar's hyperinflating, your silver and gold will race up in value, right? Just like everything else does. But it'll be real. And also it'll be much more liquid. If you're saying, gosh darn it, I've heard this so many times, you can't eat silver and gold. Well, try eating those $5 bills. It's the same thing, basically do that. But if you're going to store all your wealth in widgets, how liquid are those widgets? I mean, think about that. Gold and silver are very liquid compared to many other items. I mean, well, and this is a 10-ounce silver bar, my one 10-ounce silver bar. I mean, this is right now today the equivalent of what, 30 $10 bills, right? What's the difference? We stack up 30 $10 bills or have this, I mean, I'm talking about portability. Sure, it's heavy, but still this is real, right? And this is being recognized by a growing number of states. Correct.
In the United States, and a growing number of individual people, and not the federal government, we know that, but all the other federal governments of the world seem to be growing and moving more toward recognizing things like gold and silver as like the true store of value, right? They're moving away from dollars. They're selling dollars, right?
Yeah. So if you want to take a big picture, let's do a big picture look at this.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is, I know there's a lot of folks out there, and trust me, I know some of them that are wanting to get rich with gold and silver, that its day is coming, sort of thing.
Right.
But there's the big picture is This is one of those. I talked earlier, about history being replete with turning points. This is one of them right now. What is going to be money in the United States? What shall be money? And guess what? We got the Federal Reserve trying to shove something down our throats, or we can go to the Constitution. But we, the people, decide. And if we have to do it state by state, we have to do it state by state, because they will not gold back the money at the federal level. It won't happen. Never. Right. Under any circumstance can that be allowed to happen. So we make the decision in our states to use gold and silver. We make that decision, and we do not take the Federal Reserve's option after they're the ones who destroyed the currency to begin with.
And look at what Texas is doing, right? Mm-hmm. They're on a state level, regulated by their comptroller. They're talking, they have their depository. Now they're talking about even developing not a cryptocurrency, but a gold-backed digital currency.
Correct.
Which would let, individuals use gold and silver for their everyday transactions. And UPMA up in Utah allows people across the country the ability to do that as well. And,
and they're looking into blockchain solutions too. Once again, crypto and blockchain, you have to think of them as two separate things. The blockchain technology is really innovative. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting stuff. An open ledger, if you will, that is immutable and that cannot be hacked or broken. So that's. But I'll once again suggest to people to think of this as a big picture thing. Yeah, and that this isn't about getting rich. This is about deciding what what money is in the future, because you do have a say, and you do it through your state. That's how you have your say. You're not going to get it done through the federal government. And then, basically, let's choose a money where they can't control you and decide what you're going to eat for the day, and decide whether or not you're allowed to drive your car for the day, or how far you can travel, or, if you're even allowed to continue using your wallet, your digital wallet. If you really put up a bad post, like, for instance, if you put up a post on Facebook saying, don't go against the Federal Reserve, otherwise you'll end up in a convertible with the top down in a parade. And they come back at you and say, well, we really didn't like that comment very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Holland. We're shutting down your digital wallet for 1 week. So good luck. Yeah, it'll be back up in 1 week.
We'll teach you, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Interesting times. I like the fact, and I forget how you specifically said it, but we are at a turning point now. I mean, we are.
We are.
Yeah. And it's hard to, I think we're like any other person in history that lived through turning points. You probably, most people don't realize that they lived through a turning point until they've already made the turn. You know what I'm saying? Most people are asleep.
Yeah, but there are certain times where, basically, you're in one of them.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, a really big one was civil rights. That was a huge turning point. Yeah. That was literally, a defining moment in American history.
Yeah.
We have another one that is probably the biggest, because we're the world reserve currency. We're about to lose that status with many countries, and we have to decide what is going to be money when that happens.
Yeah.
Are we going to still continue to use the hyperinflating dollar until everyone's in so much pain they cry uncle and go to the digital dollar that the Federal Reserve is offering in its place? Or do we prepare for this? Do we prepare for it as states and as communities and as individuals, and actually embrace what the Constitution says, what our founding fathers said we should do? Because guess what? The founding fathers went through 2 hyperinflations during the Revolutionary War. 2. And it wasn't called money back then. It was called script. They were writing little pieces of paper, and they were using that as money to fund the war, and it hyperinflated, and then they started with another one, and that one hyperinflated. That's why they have gold and silver in the Constitution, gang. They knew what could happen to paper currency. They knew.
It's happened so many times throughout history, right? And it's happened so many times throughout history where countries lost their status as being the world reserve currency. It feels like, I think the most Americans, like, it's a foreign concept. If they even do think about it, it's a foreign concept that it could happen, but it's happened. it happens. It will happen. And like you said, on an individual basis, a community basis, family basis, a state by state basis, we need to be prepared. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate it. And, you know, God bless us all in this, because this could end well or it can end badly. And it's really up to us as individuals. So if we're sitting on the couch watching Ron's basement, scratching our heads going, what can we do? I have the answer for you. Work with your state. Make sure there's gold and silver legislation in your state. And if it's there, support it. And if it's done for the year, plan it out so you get that pre-filed for 2024. So you get it done in your state, so you're protected.
Yep. And if people want to get in touch with Pat or learn more about his organization, Missouri Freedom Organization, the website is mofree.org. I'll put a link to that in the description below.
Thank
Pat,
you, sir. I
hopefully
appreciate
we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
You bet. It's been my pleasure, Ron. Thank you. God bless you, sir.
All right.